Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're opening our sources on a moment of, well, just staggering historical tension.
Hmm.
It's this unexpected, completely defiant act of civil courage that, it really set the tone for accountability across continents and even millennia.
It's a scene you can almost picture, right? Thousands of people are gathered in Medina, and they're listening to their Caliph,
Mm.
a figure of immense strength, of just unparalleled authority.
And we're talking about Umar ibn al-Khattab.
Exactly. He's speaking to the community,
Mm.
and he's urging them toward, piety, honesty, obedience. He's not just the commander of armies. He is, in a very real sense, the custodian of the entire ethical framework of this new state.
The ultimate ruler is speaking. And then in a moment that just completely defines the relationship between the governing and the governed, the silence is just shattered.
And not by applause
No.
or, some kind of insurrection. It's shattered by the voice of one single citizen demanding an explanation.
And it's not even an explanation about some huge policy decision?
No, not at all. It's not about war or taxes. It's
Yeah.
deeply personal, and yet it's so profoundly symbolic. It's about a piece of cloth.
The piece of cloth.
And that unexpected, almost impossible interruption, that's really the jumping off point for our entire 1400-year investigation today.
That citizen, armed with nothing but the expectation of justice, he interrupts the caliph. He actually refuses obedience until the caliph accounts for what he's wearing.
Wow.
And that defiance, that single act, is the start of our mission for this deep dive. To trace this ethical thread of accountability from the 7th century Islamic Caliphate all the way to, well, the 21st century modern judicial systems of the U.S. and Pakistan.
And the sources we have, they give us these three very distinct but conceptually linked case studies, and they force us and you to confront this question of whether power can ever truly be absolute.
Yeah.
We're looking for those pivotal moments when the rulers themselves were actually compelled to justify their actions, not just politically, but ethically and, in the end, legally.
And we're not just, summarizing what happened. We really want to try and extract what legal minds call the ratio decidendi.
The underlying principle.
Exactly. The core reasoning that connects these events that seem so disparate across time and geography. What makes the question about a piece of cloth in Medina conceptually, philosophically, the same as the Supreme Court demanding tapes from a U.S. president in Washington?
So the mission for you, listening, is to really grasp that common ethical denominator. We want to show that authority doesn't matter where it comes from, divine right, a democratic mandate, military might. It's fundamentally a trust.
An amana.
An amana, precisely. And it is never, ever an immunity.
Okay, let's unpack this. What's genuinely fascinating here, for me, is just the sheer consistency of this principle. It seems to transcend culture, legal codes, entire historical epochs. It really speaks to some kind of universal truth about what legitimate power is.
It does. Authority is, paradoxically, at its strongest when it's transparent, when it's accountable. It's always a temporary assignment, a charge that's entrusted by the governed. It's never an inherent right.
And we're going to track how that initial moral standard sort of evolved.
Right. How it becomes constitutional supremacy and judicial review.
So let's begin with that story. Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab, who is just a monumental figure in Islamic history. This is the golden age of justice in Medina. But to really appreciate how radical that citizen's challenge was, we need to understand the scale of Umar's power.
We really do. I mean, by the time this incident happens, the early Islamic State is going through this period of just explosive expansion. Umar wasn't a mayor. He was the head of an empire that was stretching across huge swaths of the Middle East.
So his personal authority was immense.
Immense is the right word. He was the head of state, the commander-in-chief of the armies, and the supreme judicial authority. All of it rolled into one person.
So to challenge him wasn't just like political dissent.
Oh, no. It was risking everything, your life, your property, your standing, everything.
And the sources, they really emphasize that he's speaking to this huge gathering and he's demanding honesty and obedience from them. He's the one setting the moral tone for the entire community.
A community whose very survival, by the way, depended on shared resources and absolute integrity.
So let's set the scene a bit more. We need to get into the specific material context here.
Okay, so this wasn't some wealthy, industrialized society with endless resources. Things like textiles, cloth were incredibly valuable and carefully managed. Often they were communally distributed.
Right.
So our sources detail that a shipment of cloth, a really vital commodity, had arrived, and it was divided equally among everyone. the Caliph included.
So every single person gets one share.
One share.
Hmm.
And that one share was enough to make a single piece of clothing, maybe a shirt or trousers, but probably not a full, complete robe.
Okay, so there's the setup. When Umar stands up, he's addressing thousands of people. And he is dressed in a full robe, a robe that is visibly made of more material than one share would allow.
And that immediately raises a critical question, doesn't it? It's not about fashion or tailoring.
No, it's about public trust. It's about resource allocation. Did the leader take more than his fair share? Was there private gain at the expense of communal fairness?
Precisely. And that's the moment. That is when the interruption happens. This man just breaks attention, and he refuses to offer his allegiance, his obedience, until he gets an answer.
What were his exact words again?
Something like, "Oh, Umar, we will not obey you until you explain how you got that extra piece of cloth you wear."
I think we sometimes just glaze over the sheer weight of that moment. I mean, just try to imagine it. You're standing up in the middle of a massive public address,
To the most powerful man you know.
and you're leveling an accusation of, essentially, corruption, even if it seems minor, against the absolute ruler of a growing empire. The immediate, rational expectation. It should have been swift, decisive, maybe even violent punishment.
Of course. The stakes for that citizen were truly monumental.
He's basically performing an act of civic courage that, it just transcends any single political system. He's establishing a kind of hierarchy where transparency and fairness come before the demand for obedience. He's saying, before I entrust you with my allegiance, you have to prove you haven't violated our communal trust.
And this is what makes Caliph Umar's reaction so incredibly powerful. It's the complete subversion of what everyone must have been expecting.
Right. He didn't get defensive.
He didn't invoke his power, his divine sanction, his military authority. The sources are clear. He didn't even react with anger.
He smiled.
That smile, I think that smile is maybe the most crucial part of this entire story. It just instantly diffuses all that tension.
And it validates the question.
It completely validates the citizen's right to ask it. It shows that Umar understood that the question, as challenging as it was legitimate. It was necessary to maintain the integrity of his own governance.
And he doesn't even provide the defense himself, which is another brilliant move in accountability.
Yes. He defers to a witness. He asks his son, Abdullah, to stand up and answer the man.
Which is just, it's a perfect way to do it. You're using a verifiable third party to confirm the facts. It's not just his word against the citizens.
And the defense itself is so simple, so transparent, and ultimately undeniable. Abdullah confirms that because his father's share wasn't enough for a full garment.
He gave his father his own share.
He had donated his own share of the communal cloth to his father so that Umar could sew a complete robe. It was a private transaction between a father and a son.
So it established, right there in front of everyone, that no public resource had been misused. The garment was made from two legitimate, individually owned share.
And the resolution is just as pivotal. The citizen who is satisfied not by force, not by some command,
but by clear, demonstrable transparency.
he confirms his allegiance. He says, "Now we shall obey you."
Obedience, then, in this system, has to be earned. It's earned through a full public accounting.
This whole sequence, the challenge, the transparency, the verification, and then the earned allegiance, it sets the gold standard for leadership accountability.
And Umar, he doesn't just let the moment pass. He solidifies it. He makes it a principle of governance.
It's captured so beautifully in the sources.
He says, there is no good in you if you do not question me, and no good in me if I do not answer you.
I mean, just think about that statement. It's more than just a nice moral sentiment. It's an institutional feedback mechanism.
A dual responsibility.
Exactly. The ruler is obligated to answer, and the ruled, the people, are obligated to question. The health of the entire society is tied to that fearless, reciprocal relationship.
And this establishes accountability that's based fundamentally on moral responsibility, which is all wrapped up in that concept you mentioned earlier, Amana.
Amana is the crucial technical term here. It translates to trust or fidelity, guardianship.
Okay.
And when you apply it to governance, it implies that public office is not ownership. It's a temporary guardianship of the people's welfare, of their resources. You are ethically compelled to be transparent and honest and frugal because you're just administering what belongs to other people.
So this is the origin point, then. This is the ethical foundation that we're tracking through history. Accountability starts with this deep ethical conviction that the authority you hold is totally contingent on public faith.
And it's all about setting a precedent that even the most powerful person on earth has to account for a single extra scrap of public wealth.
And what's amazing is that standard is set voluntarily.
Yes.
Umar wasn't compelled by a constitution or a court system or anything like that. He was compelled by his own ethical understanding of what it meant to hold power.
Which, you could argue, makes that standard infinitely more powerful than one that's just imposed by some statute. It's the highest form of transparency, and it's established right at the very beginning of the state.
Okay, now let's make a huge jump. We're going 1,300 years into the future.
Yeah.
And we transition from a moral test in a public forum to a full-blown constitutional crisis that's mediated by the judiciary.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Right, because that same principle that was established in Medina, it's now tested under the ironclad framework of the modern rule of law.
The jump is so dramatic. We're going from the Caliphate to the intense political tensions of 20th century Washington, D.C., but the core issue, it's identical.
Can the person at the very apex of power claim immunity from public accountability?
That's the question. And the challenge, of course, revolves around President Richard Nixon following the escalating Watergate scandal.
So the special prosecutor, the legal investigations, they all demand access to these secret recordings that were made in the Oval Office.
Because they believe those tapes contained evidence of illegal activity, of obstruction of justice.
And Nixon's response was to assert executive privilege.
Which is a very complex legal concept, isn't it? It's rooted in the separation of powers.
It is. The idea is that the president needs confidentiality to get candid advice from his staff and to effectively run the executive branch, especially when it comes to things like national security.
So Nixon was essentially arguing that the sanctity of his office, of the executive branch, placed these internal communications completely beyond the reach of the courts.
Which set up this ultimate political and constitutional standoff. I mean, if Nixon had succeeded, he would have effectively established a kind of constitutional immunity zone for the president.
Right. It would allow the executive to just obstruct a legitimate criminal investigation simply by citing his office.
And that fundamentally threatened the entire balance of power in the U.S. government.
The challenge was so profound because the principle of executive privilege is a real thing. The courts do acknowledge the need for confidentiality.
Yeah.
But the question before the Supreme Court in the case, United States v. Nixon, was whether that privilege was absolute.
Or just qualified.
Or just qualified. Is the president the ultimate final arbiter of what the law demands?
And the Supreme Court, which was led at the time by Chief Justice Warren Burger, delivered one of the most significant rulings in modern constitutional history.
And it was unanimous, 8-0.
That unanimity is so critical, isn't it?
It's everything. It meant there was no ideological wiggle room on this foundational matter. It signaled that the principle they were upholding just transcended any kind of partisan politics.
And the court ruled decisively. The tapes must be released.
And their reasoning, that's what provides the constitutional echo of Caliph Umar. They did acknowledge a generalized need for confidentiality, but they ruled that this generalized interest could not overcome the specific fundamental requirements of due process and the fair administration of criminal justice.
So, in short, the court is saying that the need for evidence in an ongoing criminal investigation outweighs a president's generalized claim of privilege.
Yes. They essentially codified the very principle we are tracking. They made it enforceable by law. And their conclusion became this famous phrase, "Not even the president is above the law."
And that phrase is just a direct, secular, constitutional confirmation of that 7th century ethical principle.
It really is.
Where the Caliph voluntarily submitted himself to moral accountability.
The president was compelled by law to submit to constitutional accountability.
In both cases, power had to explain itself to a higher source.
Right. In one case, it's the moral law of Amanah. In the other, it's the codified rule of law.
And the enforcement was immediate, and for Nixon, it was devastating.
The court ordered the release of the evidence. And when the contents of those tapes finally became public,
well, they proved his involvement in the cover-up.
Which led directly to his resignation just a short time later. The law didn't just demand an explanation.
It enforced a reckoning.
Yeah.
And that contrast between the two scenarios is just so powerful. Umar's willingness to explain himself actually maintained and strengthened his authority.
But Nixon's resistance to explain led directly to the total collapse of his authority.
It just confirms that the fate of leadership hinges entirely on its willingness to submit to scrutiny.
This really solidifies the position of the judiciary, doesn't it? Not just as a co-equal branch of government, but as the ultimate guardian of accountability under the separation of powers doctrine.
The law isn't just, advisory for the powerful.
No, it's the ultimate master.
Yeah.
And the court demonstrated that judicial review is the constitutional mechanism that sort of replaces that public confrontation we saw in Medina.
So the court becomes the forum where the explanation is demanded.
Exactly. It provides the legal scaffolding that earlier ethical mandate needed in order to become institutionalized, to become permanent.
It shows how a moral idea, a ruler can't take more than his due, evolves into this enforceable law that a ruler cannot hide evidence that is necessary for justice.
So now we shift again.
Yeah.
We move to the 21st century, and we go to the Asian context.
And this proves that the principle isn't limited to historical precedent or, it's not solely a Western constitutional tradition.
Not at all. It is a fundamental global requirement for any kind of legitimate governance.
The setting is Pakistan in 2017, and the case is Imran Ahmad Khan Nyatsi v. Mian Mohammad Nawaz Sharif.
Right. And this all centered on the fallout from that massive global data leak that became known as the Panama Papers.
Which exposed the offshore wealth and these complex financial dealings of global elites all over the world.
And this case placed the sitting Prime Minister of Pakistan, Nawaz Sharif, under intense judicial scrutiny regarding his family's assets, many of which were held offshore and hadn't been fully declared or accounted for.
So this is a little different from Watergate, isn't it? The tapes were about the mechanism of power abuse, like obstruction of justice.
That's a great point. The Panama Papers case, it directly challenged the foundational requirement of integrity for holding public office.
The question was really stark. Did the prime minister meet the standard of honesty and truthfulness that's required to hold the highest position in the country?
And the Supreme Court of Pakistan conducted this incredibly intense investigation. The finding was conclusive. The court ultimately disqualified Prime Minister Sharif from office.
And the grounds for disqualification weren't initially about, technical corruption charges. It was about the concealment of assets.
It was about the failure to demonstrate integrity.
Concealing assets. That is the ethical breach that just echoes all the way back to the cloth question, doesn't it?
It's the exact same principle. When a caliph is questioned about one extra piece of communal fabric, it's about his fiduciary duty.
Right.
When a 21st century prime minister conceals millions of dollars in assets, it's the same breach. It's just scaled up dramatically. But it's still rooted in a failure of transparency regarding wealth.
And here's where the Pakistani Supreme Court provides this critical, legal, and really philosophical link back to the 7th century.
To understand what they did, you have to look at the legal standards that are embedded in the Pakistani Constitution, specifically Articles 62 and 63.
And what do they say?
Well, these articles stipulate that a member of parliament must be Sadiq and Amin.
Sadiq and Amin, so truthful and trustworthy.
Truthful and trustworthy. And those terms, Sadiq and Amin, are directly derived from the ethical lexicon of the Caliphate era. They effectively enshrine that ancient concept of amana, of trust, into modern constitutional law.
Wow. So it's explicitly written in.
Explicitly. So the court leveraged these constitutional clauses to enforce that moral mandate. They weren't just applying some penal code. They were enforcing an ethical minimum standard for public service.
And the court's justification explicitly reaffirmed that public office is a trust and amana.
And that the failure to be fully transparent about personal assets was violation of that sacred trust.
And there was a specific judge who articulated this, right?
Yes. Justice Asif Said Khosa. In his extensive opinion for the decision, he just clearly articulated this defining philosophy. He wrote, "Let honesty be the guiding principle for those who hold public trust."
That quote aligns perfectly with Umar's standard.
It's almost a direct echo. Umar demanded transparency to earn obedience. Justice Khosa demands honesty as the guiding principle for upholding the amana. The expectation is separated by over a millennium, but ethically, it's identical.
So what we're seeing is this fascinating interaction between legal systems. You have a common law court system navigating the incredible complexities of global finance and modern anti-corruption law. And it consciously grounds its most significant decision in an ancient, fundamental ethical requirement that is rooted in this idea of trust.
The comparative detail here is essential. Remember the Caliph's son. He provided a quick, simple, verifiable account.
Right. Here's my share of the cloth. Done.
Done. But the prime minister, through his legal team, he failed to provide a convincing or honest account of where this offshore wealth came from.
So the mechanism of failure is the exact inverse of the success in Medina.
It is. When you conceal assets, you are signaling that you believe you are immune from the very transparency that you demand from your own citizens. You destroy the amana.
And the court responded by using its maximum judicial power disqualification to enforce that failure of ethical trust.
Which proves that the principle that authority must explain itself is not just some philosophical nicety. It's an active, enforceable judicial requirement across the globe.
It's a potent reminder, then, that the tools of accountability have evolved from a public forum to constitutional courts, but the underlying mandate, that remains fixed.
It remains fixed. Leaders must be utterly transparent regarding their use of public resources and, just as importantly, their personal financial probity.
Okay, so this is where we synthesize the journey. We've looked at three political figures: a caliph, a president, and a prime minister.
Spanning 1,400 years.
And three continents: the Arabian Peninsula, North America, South Asia. And yet, all three of these stories, they converge on a single vital truth.
Let's pull those comparative threads together, then, to really define this universal principle, this ratio decidendi.
Let's do it. So first, in the Islamic era, 7th century, Caliph Umar voluntarily answers in public. Accountability is based entirely on moral responsibility, on amana.
And the core principle there is that the willingness to answer is what defines the legitimacy of power.
And the core phrase:
No good in me if I do not answer you.
Okay. Then, 20th century U.S. President Nixon is compelled to release evidence. Here, accountability is secured through constitutional adherence, through the rule of law.
And the principle is that power is subordinate to the constitutional process.
And the phrase:
No man, not even the president, is above the law.
Right. Finally, 21st century Pakistan. Prime Minister Sharif is disqualified for concealing his assets. Accountability is enforced through a judicial interpretation of ethical mandates that are actually codified into the law.
Sadiq and Amin. And the principle is that public office is a perpetual trust.
So what unites all of these? The single unifying takeaway, the ratio decidendi, is what?
I think it's this. Authority is a trust, not immunity, and power must always explain itself to justice.
That concept, authority, is a trust. That is the philosophical bridge we've been looking for all this time.
It is.
It's what transforms a ruler into a servant of the law. It completely strips away any claim to divine right or absolute presidential power or anything like it.
And if you trace that historical and philosophical connection, you can really see how the ethical demand for transparency that's inherent in amana, eventually, over centuries, manifests in Western legal structures as things like due process and judicial review.
The moral idea becomes codified law.
Exactly.
Let's take due process, for instance. Due process is, it's essentially the legal system demanding that the state explain why it's taking action against a citizen.
Right. The state has to provide evidence, it has to follow rules, it has to answer for its actions.
It's the institutionalized, highly proceduralized evolution of the caliph having to explain his piece of cloth. The power must answer to a process of justice.
And that leads directly to the concept of constitutional supremacy.
Where the Constitution is boss.
The Constitution is the boss. In a system governed by constitutional supremacy, the document that defines the rules of the game is the master, not the individual who happens to hold the office, even if that individual is the president.
The Nixon ruling was just a perfect articulation of that. Constitutional supremacy over executive self-interest.
And critically, this all circles back to public transparency. Whether it's the Caliph's public accounting to thousands of people,
the president's forced release of secret tapes to the court,
or the prime minister's assets being scrutinized by the judiciary, transparency is the non-negotiable prerequisite for any legitimate authority.
So the ultimate conclusion, then, from these 1,400 years of comparative justice is actually pretty simple but profound.
Rulers are not the masters of the law.
No. They are its highest-ranking servants. Their power is delegated, it's conditional, and it's temporary. And any attempt to claim immunity is an immediate breach of that original trust.
And that really brings us to the moral of the story, the thing that every citizen should probably internalize.
Which is?
Power without accountability breeds tyranny. Accountability without fear ensures justice.
That without fear part is so important. The fearlessness of that 7th century citizen is the essential ingredient, isn't it?
It's the requirement that the governed, that the people, be willing to push back. They have to trust that the system, whether it's based on moral law or constitutional law, will protect their right to demand an explanation.
Because if the ruler has built a perfect system of accountability, but the citizens are too fearful or maybe just too complacent or overwhelmed to ever demand the explanation,
then the system ultimately fails. Justice requires not just a perfect rule of law on paper, but a persistent culture of fearless inquiry from the people.
These three case studies, the cloth, the tapes, the assets, They all just confirm that the burden of proof, the burden of explanation, always rests with the person holding the trust. Hashtag tag out UTRO.
Wow. What an incredible synthesis. I mean, we've moved across these radically different systems of governance, from a caliphate rooted in religious and moral jurisprudence.
To modern republics built on common law and constitutional supremacy. And yet, all roads led to the exact same core requirement. If you hold authority, you hold a trust, and you must explain yourself to justice.
The universality of this ethical standard is, I think, the key takeaway. It doesn't matter if it's defined by Amana or by Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution. The requirement is the same.
Authority is granted by trust.
And trust requires full, demonstrable transparency.
So, what does all this mean for you, the citizen, sitting here today in the 21st century? I think it means that the right to question power, it isn't some revolutionary modern invention.
No, it's an ancient tradition. It predates most of the political structures that we operate under today.
And you inherit that tradition of fearless questioning.
And that, I think, leads us to a crucial final thought for you to consider. If this principle, that authority is a trust, is truly universal, what specific responsibility does that place on citizens today to ensure that that trust is upheld, especially given the sheer complexity of the modern state?
We live in this information-saturated environment, right?
Yeah.
A world of massive data collection, complex financial instruments that nobody understands, non-transparent algorithms.
Exactly. So how does the spirit of the cloth question, that simple, direct demand for honesty about an observable, shared public resource, how does that translate to the digital age?
That's a great question. If a ruler had to account for a single piece of cloth, what must modern leaders explain to us about the algorithms and the data infrastructures that influence our lives, our elections, our commerce?
The historical mandate remains absolutely fixed. Question the source of authority, demand the full account, and never ever allow authority to become immunity.
The citizen's job is not merely to obey.
No, it's to relentlessly ensure that the trust placed in the powerful is honored. That tradition is 1,400 years old, and it is entirely up to you to keep it alive.